So, I've written a book called Post-Capitalism, A Guide to Our Future. I'm just going to talk about what the ideas are in there, because it's already been one of those phenomena that publishers find a bit annoying. That is the syndicated version of a 4,000-word article based on it in The Guardian went, quote-unquote, according to Kath Vine, who edits The Guardian, gigantic in terms of readership. We don't know yet whether that means that that's enough post-capitalism for everybody and they don't buy the book. So what am I saying in it? I'm arguing that information technology corrodes three mechanisms of capitalism as we've known it. It corrodes the price mechanism, that is, the zero cost of reproduction involved in the copy-paste action that is now applicable to large segments of reality, physical reality, because information itself is physical. This ability with information goods to copy them and reproduce them for free makes it very difficult to price them, because according to normal economic theory, their price should fall towards close to zero. Instead, what we've had is a new kind of monopoly capitalism arise in the last 10 years, 10 to 15 years, whereby large companies are created, not as with old monopolies, simply to take over their rivals and dominate a market. It's the companies are created to monopolize the information. And once you can monopolize digital information goods, you can set any price you want on them. 99p a track. When I started writing the book, iTunes had 95% of all digital music sales at 99p a track. No supply, no demand, no quality comes into that 99p. It is the simple product of Apple's position, which, as I say in the book, properly stated should be, we prevent the abundance of music. Now there are other ways of negotiating the space between 99p and zero, and we've seen them come about in the form of sharing, of the renting music, direct publishing yourself, etc., SoundCloud. But what we can say with certainty is that information dissolves the price mechanism. The second thing we can say is that, incidentally, if you follow me on Medium, you'll find the notes I'm speaking to just in note form there. That's why I'm not doing kind of TED-style click thing here. It's eroding wages. It erodes the link between work and wages by making, many of us in the information space, many of us in the creative or high corporate space don't work hours. We get on a plane, we produce information. Nobody's paying us to be on that plane by the hour. We switch to a movie. Nobody stops paying us because we switch to a movie. We deliver a target rather than work a series of hours. And more than that, for those of us with incredibly niche skills, the software developer, we're really being paid to exist. We're being paid to exist and attach our name to a company and not to another company or rival or other product. The third thing information does is it dissolves hierarchy and ownership. So we're beginning to see new unmanaged projects where the outcome is a non-ownable shared thing. Wikipedia, Linux, Apache, all these right-wing cardigan-wearing old geezers who don't like my book basically said, well, give us something spectacular. I think, the biggest information product in the world, the system that operates half of all web servers, the operating system running all 500 of the top supercomputers in the world is, to me, spectacular. It's just that the clue is in the name. They are solutions. They don't need to be. They can be incrementally improved until we need a better solution. They don't need bells, whistles, a marketing company or a public affairs company persuading people not to regulate them, like the big tech companies do. So we have this dissolution of price, wage, hierarchy, ownership going on because of information. The revolutionary thing to do is to name it, to stop thinking of it as a niche thing, a quiet thing, a hobby, a kind of esoteric language, peer-to-peer, commons, all that stuff that we know about, and actually name what's happening. And what I have tried to do is to describe it as the incipient form of a system that will replace capitalism. A post-market system, post-capitalism, in the process of formation, spontaneously, without anybody asking, behind our backs, economically, physically, culturally, socially, it is coming. And the point is then what to do. But even by naming it, I think it reorders one's understanding of what we are doing. Even when we turn up to a thing like this, or when we paint a painting, or we make a video like the one, or product, a piece of art like the one we've just seen. Name it, and the world changes already because you understand what is going on. Like Mark Rylance does in that bit of Wolf Hall, when he tells this benighted, idiotic aristocrat, something like, you think the world is all about jousting, castles, border posts, armour, and titles, but it's actually all about banking. And I can show you that because I can switch off your nightly, KNIGATLY, nightly lifestyle with my banker friends in Amsterdam. You hadn't realised something is changing. I can name it. It is a system based on commerce. We need to do that. The third thing is more than a third thing. It's 3, 4, and 5. But it's what are the tools? I think if post-capitalism is to be based on an information economy, trickling down to as an information layer through the real world, then the most important tool is imagination. In virtual manufacturing, aeroplanes are virtually built, virtually designed, as in 3D, but much more than design, flown in 3D. Every piece of carbon fibre bends as the plane lands. Every brass screw is put under pressure and behaves as a brass screw. A little man is walked out on the runway to see if his hand can go up and tweak the brass screw with a Phillips or a straight screwdriver, depending on what it is. That's virtual manufacturing. And it dramatically reduces the cost, the design and implementation costs of everything. Those who do it, and it's almost a behind closed doors, it's so niche and proprietorial, it's difficult to know exactly, but those who do it say it massively reduces the initial cost of design and implementation. That's where the cost used to be in engineering, in the building of the prototype, and then the second one, and the fifth one. Eventually, towards the end of the production run, you get it right. Now you can get it right. One of the people involved in virtual manufacturing, in a major Salford-based installation that does it, told me that he was about to retire, and that when they designed the tail fin of the Tornado fighter bomber in the 70s, they'd done 12 stress loads on the tail using slide rules and early calculators. And on the Typhoon, its replacement, they'd done 186 million of the same things. And today, you could probably do the 186 million in a couple of supercomputer passes over a couple of days. No act of imagination, when we can do things like that, no act of imagination is wasted, because the act of imagination becomes part of the design process in a way it couldn't be when aeroplanes were, when you know that the blueprints of aeroplanes used to be stored in lofts on silk at full size, so they can just cut round it, draw it on a piece of metal, cut round it. We don't have to do that anymore, so we can imagine 186 million versions of the wing we want to make on an airplane. We can also imagine 186 million versions of the transition we want to begin. The next tool is the networked individual. The self expanded into devices. The self leaking out into other selves in a way that everybody here, I think, I can't see the audience because of this light, but everybody here, I think, knows what I'm talking about. We have put ourselves onto devices. We've created multiple selves, so that in World of Warcraft I am this, but in Skyrim I am this. At work I am another breed, ethnicity, tribe, or identity. With my partner, something else. That seems to the old generation, even the world in which I was born, as just hypocrisy or falseness. But to a new generation, it is natural, because it is natural to create the multiple self. Because the multiple self can then leak, can then interact with other selves on a more negotiated and less hermetic basis than in the world of hierarchy and ownership and property. Another tool is modularity. In a software house, even in a digital edit of a documentary, information allows everything to be done modularly. You can work on this bit, see if you can do as much as you can on it, and then leave it for others. You can work at different timescales. You can work independently without knowing what everybody else is doing. Post-capitalism, in that sense, is a bit like a video game. That is, there are trees, adventures, quests you can follow. But actually, if you don't like the one you're on, or you've done enough, you can back out of it and do another one, maybe as a different character. The next thing is you have to design the victory conditions. Actually, this is quite hard in detail. And in the book, I've only just begun to do this. It was the thing I least wanted to do was to lay out what you do. But the general victory conditions of the post-capitalist game, by whichever tree one wants to follow, of skill accumulation or projects or 886 million imaginary versions of X, Y, or Z, the end point is abundance. We know we can have information abundance because it is possible now. We know we'll have post-capitalism when people go on making information goods and physical things and making them better than before and designing into them all the things that capitalism doesn't like to design. That is a recognition of the external cost. I designed a power station. Whoops, it polluted your river. Who knew that was going to happen? When we design things in a holistic way, sustainable by the earth and by people, and make them, and sometimes people pay us and sometimes they don't, will be quite a long way towards a post-capitalist world. But of course, that means we have to take control of things and work out, and this is the hard bit, how to get to those victory conditions. And I can't do it in my own mind on my own. I think we could probably do a brilliant job if we scrapped our plans to do funkadelic art for the next 48 hours and just did that. But we still wouldn't get far because it all depends on human beings and what their needs are. Abundance is possible in information, but it's got to be sensibly designed and negotiated. We've got to find ways of inhabiting the space between the 99p iTunes track and the zero-cost Pirate Bay track. And one of them is, with knowledge, is to design shorter copyright decay times, just like the generic drugs that are used to treat HIV. Society forced that onto pharma companies. We could force it on ourselves. We could force new copyright structures on ourselves with maybe higher reward in the short term and lower in the long term. We also have to understand and conceptualize the difference between free stuff and paid for stuff, and understand what motivates us before we ask anybody else why they're doing it. What motivates us? Why do you update a Wikipedia page? Why do you release a music track onto SoundCloud more or less for free or with no prospect of any decent payment? Why do you do it? I do it because I think that it's a gift into a spinning world out of which other gifts might come back to me, but it's random. And I don't want to start calculating it because the myth is that people think, okay, post-capitalism is a calculated non-market thing. So I do 3 hours work for you, you do 3.5 for me because your labour is worth different than mine. No, it's about throwing things into the abundance pool and withdrawing them as needed. And of course, we're miles away from it, but in some sectors, it's almost in sight. And if you design those sectors better, it could be achievable. Above all, post-capitalism for me is a human transition. If you look around this room, you can't, but if you can look through the gloom, what you're seeing is, I think even now, a group of people, how different they are from the hierarchic, uniform, single-self society into which I was born. And again, we have achieved these personal freedoms, the freedom to be obsessed with the self, to analyze the self, to be individual, to have individual rights, and the self's relationships and its rights have been massively expanded, I think, for those of us in developed non-dictatorial countries in a lifetime, but we've hardly started. The human transition side of it begins when you recognize that this is what's happening, that the different forms of behavior, the different forms of protest, the different kinds of relationships we form are actually a product of a changed potentiality that is sitting there unused. We've actually, in some senses, run faster as human beings towards the goal than society has been able to move behind us. So the human transition, it is what it is. It becomes what it becomes. It is it is what human beings make it and cannot be designed by, even by a virtual manufacturing facility. I think above all, the last 2 points are these. Understand the power of creativity. Under capitalism, creative art is there to adorn the system, while design informs it and adds value to it. Now, already, everybody involved in those two spheres of activity already knows that's falling apart, that there is a blurring, that in creative art, something unusual is happening, that I can only describe in the words that David Shields used in the book Reality Hunger. Reality is starting to invade it, and that the forms are falling apart and being remixed and remade because we are injecting more and more of reality into what we produce as art. That's a kind of general statement which, if one concretized it down into music or literature or the theatre, you could. But I leave it hanging there as a general statement that to me is a symptom, again, that something bigger is happening than we have understood. But in the future, creativity in a post-capitalism becomes core. Because first of all, there's not enough work to go around, and people have to do things that are fulfilling, that are not necessary work. So one of those things is very likely to be creative stuff. Also, Marx said work cannot become play, because the utopian socialist Fourier had thought work could become like play. Now, you just walk into a video game design place in Glasgow and you see the football table, and you see the guitar, and you see the Barcelona salami. People wander up and down, they play football, they play the guitar, they eat the salami, they do a bit of games design. Actually, I think Marx underestimated the extent to which work can become play. But work is work. If you're a developer, you're a games designer, if you're a TV presenter, work is still work, no matter how enjoyable or intellectually stimulating it can be. But we can also design beauty into reality in a way that is, as I suggested, more holistic. A beautiful solution to a social network might be one that doesn't treat people like lab rats, or that doesn't scrape their information, or a beautiful solution to the problem of city transport might not be an automated car, no matter how beautiful its shell might, and aerodynamically its shell might be designed. You could just redesign an integrated intelligent transport system. You see what I mean? The creativity is going to be core because we're going to take collective social control over production of things, ideas, and culture in a way that we can't under capitalism when it's all private and paid for. And finally, we have to understand who we are. I think in the process of getting my head around, because I came from a very traditional route towards these conclusions, as a sort of left economist, a kind of Marxist radical thinker about politics, and a white bloke in his 50s, that's quite a traditional route. But coming to it, I've begun to understand what's going on. There is a group of people out there in society, and it's very large, who have almost nothing fundamentally in common in terms of their personal values, behaviours and ideals with everything that is thrown at them. The newspapers, the TV, the bullshit that comes out from Fleet Street, what is in Hollywood blockbusters. Or we can decode a Hollywood blockbuster very easily, but almost none of it is of our lives. Instead, we're making our own lives to different values, and every so often these values are allowed to kind of explode into reality, like with Syriza in Greece, like with the Scottish referendum, like accidentally with Jeremy Corbyn, like in Germany now, which loads and loads of journalists have poured over Eastern Germany looking for proto-quasi-incipient fascist groups, Pegida and etc. Who knew that the Germans were just going to come out and say refugees are welcome, and that loads and loads of football fans last Saturday just held up refugees are welcome banners. You see, that's not in the script of Fleet Street or the telly or the right-wing general capitalist monologue that we get thrown at us. But we, large numbers of us, are already living just actually in the same way as those secret, purveyors of English language Bibles did in the late Middle Ages. We're living according to a new set of values that doesn't seem to have a place in the official dialogue. Once we name them, and once we understand that they are powerful, and that actually they're very multifarious and very diverse and not very coherent, but they are something, once we name them, and I would name them as post-capitalist values, then we can actually just understand that things are achievable, and that the bullshit and the kind of patina of rubbish that is placed on top of public life is utterly fragile. And if we wanted to make it go away, it would go away. That wouldn't be our biggest problem. Anyway, unfortunately, there's no Q&As in these things, so you can't do a Q&A. But my Twitter handle is @PaulMasonNews, and if anybody wants to, at any point, including from right now, fire me a Twitter question. I'll try and answer it. Thank you.